and it's growing by the second. We're up to, I think, 75 people. So we're very delighted for all of you to join us right now. I just a little bit of housekeeping here. This event is to be about 1.5 hours in length, and knowing that we do have already a larger group, we can extend it a bit longer if people have more questions or comments. So we can just anticipate that you have that opportunity. One of our people here, Genevieve, will be providing some opening and closing reflections, with the main part of our time today being dedicated to Sister Jean's presentation. And that will be followed by an opportunity for you to ask questions following her presentation via chat box. So to begin with, I would like to ask Richard Pomavel to lead us in prayer to begin our presentation and our time together.
Okay, so the prayer today is actually visible on the DNP website. It's a prayer that Pope Francis has shared with us. It's called the Prayer for Compassion amid the coronavirus. And Pope Francis is basically calling on all Christians to respond to the coronavirus pandemic with the universality of prayer, of compassion and tenderness. And Pope Francis is adding, let us remain united. Let us make our closeness felt towards those persons who are the most lonely and tried. So the prayer goes as this: Prayer God, we pray. May we who are far from the ones we love be reminded to find ways to be the loving embrace of God for our neighbor. May the restrictions we face remind us of the daily threats to human dignity, life, and basic safety faced by so many people around the world. May we who are healthy remember people without access to basic health care. May we who are limiting our travel remember those who have no safe place to go. May we who have a social safety net remember our sisters and brothers in the global south, whose hardship will only increase. May our fear for our elders move us to love and cherish each person we encounter every day. In the face of fear, let us choose love, peace, and hope. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Richard. Just want to say that, excuse me, that we really are very grateful for each one of you for joining us today. We are in most unique times, and we are finding creative ways to be together despite the necessary distancing. And I think as people of faith, we are discovering ways to respond to one another's needs, to humanity's needs in all the varied moments that are put before us these days, near and far. And you know, we talk about going to the grocery store and the challenges of workplace and with the family. So we as our Development and Peace family want to thank and honor you for joining us today. So you will remember that tomorrow is our Solidarity Sunday, and it was to be our national annual collection for development and peace in parishes all across the country. But along came COVID-19. And when I think of development and peace, I really, there are not individual people. It's, to me, the images of multitudes of people. And there's so much good work to do, and hundreds of people who step up to do it. And on a weekend like this, I have to admit that I have the image of an anthill. And I think as children, I'm sure I'm not the only one, I would sometimes stomp on an anthill just to see with fascination how those ants would react. And you know, I think the image is along came COVID-19 to stomp on our Shareland anthill, and so what happened is that all of us, our whole community in development and peace came together to just with fury and bring back our Share Land campaign. So thank you again for all of you who have worked so hard, especially in the past months, to put on the Share Land campaign in your parishes and your communities and your schools, and then only to double down even harder with making and switching gears to a virtual Share Land campaign. So many hats off to you. So, as we realized a little while ago that our Solidarity Sunday, our Share Land collection was on a collision course with COVID-19, we created this virtual Share Land campaign for this weekend. And in doing this, we did reach back and we tried to keep those three familiar dimensions of our Share Land campaign, and that's faith, education, and fundraising. And so we hope that today's event with Sister Jean Bellini will encapsulate all those three dimensions. So thank you again. And now it's my privilege to just say a couple of words and mention some key people who are making this event possible. And I'd like to start with our logistical people, Marie-Hélène Bachand from our communications team and Noémie Lefebvre from our philanthropic team are providing us with the much needed and appreciated technical support. And Catherine Kennedy from our international program department, who has Brazil and Colombia as her portfolios. She's on standby to provide any necessary context or clarifications throughout our gathering. Geneviève Gallant is Director of Public Engagement, and she will share some opening and closing reflections. And last and certainly not least is our guest, Sister Jean Bellini. She is the member of the National Executive Coordination Team of our partner, the Pastoral Land Commission. And just a word, if you hear CPT, that means the short form in Portuguese for Pastoral Land Commission. So at this point, I would just like to give you a little bit more of a background to our very, very special guest. So Sister Jean Bellini, she was born and raised in rural Long Island, New York, which is about 100 miles out of New York City. And along with her 7 siblings, she grew up on her parents' Long Island duckling farm. Sister Jean, her studies are in biology and education. In 1966, Sister Jean entered her religious community of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Rochester. And after 10 years of teaching and campus ministry, she joined the Sisters of St. Joseph Mission in Brazil in August of 1976. And it seems that she has not looked back. So her early years as a member of the local pastoral team were in the Diocese of Jataí, I knew I was going to do this, Jataí, Goiás, and that led her to become a member of the Pastoral Land Commission as a full-time volunteer. So just a word, next year will mark her 40th years, the 40th anniversary of Sister Jean's involvement with CPT. And for 22 years, Sister Jean was a member of the pastoral team in the prelature of São Félix do Araguaia, Mato Grosso. And that was with Bishop Pedro Casaldália from 83 to 2005. And those of you who have been involved, of course, in the campaign with regard to the Amazon region, this prelature falls within the Amazon region. In 2006, Sister Jean became a volunteer at the National Secretariat of the Pastoral Land Commission, and by 2008, she was a staff in the National Secretariat. And then in 2015, she became a member of CPT's National Executive and is currently serving in this capacity in the city of Goiânia, Goiás, which is the capital city of the Brazilian state of Goiás. And that is located in the central west region of the country. And there you see the map there. Okay, so now at this point, I would like to call on Geneviève Gallant. She is going to introduce us to the partnership rationale. And I just want to say that a hallmark of DNP's approach to international solidarity is partnership. And Genevieve is going to share a little bit of why we choose this particular methodology. And Sister Jean is going to give a short response and from her perspective of being in partnership with development and peace. So Jen, please, you have the virtual floor.
Thank you, Armella. First, let me tell you how happy I am that we can do this today. I was just looking through the list of participants, and I think I recognize about 85 of the 95 names. So it's a real pleasure that we can come together in community today. So I'm going to talk a bit about how we do things at DNP, explaining our partnership model before we introduce our session with Sister Jean. I can see we have a lot of regular donors on this call, so let me just take a moment to thank you for your contributions to DNP, both financial and in your time and energy, and also in your prayers. We live in difficult times. One thing I've learned this week, I think in a new way, is the importance of a social solidarity. I've learned that it's in communities and countries where people have trust in each other and confidence in their community that we're able to take actions like physical isolation seriously. So this sense of the common good and the importance of it, that social solidarity is actually something we're living out very intensively right now. It's very much tied into what we do, this partnership model, which is based on solidarity. So I wanted to share with you a definition of solidarity that comes from Pope Francis. This is a message he shared at the World Meeting of Popular Movements in 2014. Pope Francis says, solidarity, it is a word that means much more than some acts of sporadic generosity. It is to think and to act in terms of community, of the priority of life of all over the appropriation of goods by a few. It's also to fight against the structural causes of poverty, inequality, lack of work, land and housing, the denial of social rights and labor rights. It's to confront the destructive effects of the empire of money, forced displacements, painful emigrations, the trafficking of persons, drugs, war, violence, and all those realities that many suffer and that we are each called upon to transform. Solidarity, understood in its deepest sense, is a way of making history, and this is what popular movements like Development and Peace do. So living in solidarity is at the heart of the Development and Peace mission, which means standing with our partners on an equal footing against injustice and supporting their efforts through fundraising activities and by participating in our education, mobilizing, and advocacy initiatives here at home. Our international programs is based on this solidarity, this partnership. We're working with local organizations that are best placed to understand the realities of their communities and how to address them. I'm going to go over quickly just a few principles of what this means. The partnership model. The first is we're using local expertise, so the skills and the experience of people on the ground. A key word here I would say is accompaniment, that we are called to accompany, to walk with people, and not to impose a particular way of being. I think that this one is in particular, it speaks to me, especially from the campaign and what we're doing around looking at the realities in the Amazon that we want to walk with, to accompany, to advocate with, and not to impose a particular model of development. So this partnership model also nurtures solutions that are appropriate, culturally appropriate, socially appropriate, politically appropriate. And then the big piece is that the people who are affected are major parts of the decision making. These are the folks who are at the center of it. Those who are at the center, most impacted, most affected, are those making the decisions of how to move forward. It's deeply tied into our Catholic social teachings, especially the principles of subsidiarity and participation. So what we really want to know today is, how does this partnership model work in action, and that's Sister Jean who's going to help us get a better grasp on that. But before we pass it to Sister Jean, I wanted to just say a little more about partnership. You might be asking, why, Jen, are you focusing so much on partnership? The reason is because DNP works with partner organizations to affect change, but we cannot do that without you. And as a member and as a donor, you're an integral part of this partnership. What we've been working on is to grow our monthly donor base, which is an exciting part of partnership, because this means you can be part of the long-term change, especially in a world that tends to divide those who donate and those who are the beneficiaries. For us, it's about coming together so that we can all work together as agents of change. So with that, I'd like to invite Sister Jean to take the lead.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for the explanation, Genevieve. And hello to everyone. As Armenia explained, since I joined the National Executive in 2015, I've had a closer contact with DAP. And I can testify that through my contacts, mainly with Gilio, and for a while with Benedict and Catherine, who before her maternity leave was very active in relating to Brazil, that the quality of relationship was very, very evident to us, and that each of those persons really tried to understand our reality here. But going back to what Genevieve shared, what caught me to share with you was the question that partnership and subsidiarity are connected. In other words, recently the CPT has found that there are different foundations and agencies out there in the world that want to help developing countries, but they come with a predetermined plan of what we need. And then they offer that to us and try to get us to sometimes even change our priorities in order to give them what they want. While what we've discovered over these years with DAP is a real attempt at partnership, at understanding our reality, trusting in us, dialoguing with us if they don't understand one aspect or another, and respecting what we say are the important ways and the manner in which to do what we try to do together with the rural poor. Recently, last year, they spoke with us about the Lenten campaign that they wanted to start. And again, they said they wanted to involve the people with whom the CPT works. And with all the difficulty of getting quality videos and so forth, I can testify that those communities and those pastoral agents that work with them in the states and the Amazon region really appreciate the efforts and the solidarity that you manifest through this over the past year. In addition, right now, as we're trying to deal with this coronavirus, we've had the question of how are the communities that are in the more remote places dealing with this information? What kind of support are they getting? And we still don't have a clear picture on that.
Thank you very much, Sister Jean, for your reply to Genevieve on partnership. That's very heartwarming for us to hear, and do keep us on our toes and keep us faithful to that mission. So I now invite you to join to begin your presentation on the Pastoral Land Commission.
Okay. As Armelia spoke earlier, the name of the Pastoral Land Commission in Portuguese is Comissão Pastoral da Terra. And so our nickname is CPT, which I'll use during the presentation. And as I was preparing this and the little I knew before about DAP and looking at your website, I saw many, many similarities between us. Just to begin, each organization was created by the National Conference of Bishops in response to a felt need of the times. And each reflect the mission of the Church in the world as manifest in the Second Vatican Council document Gaudium et Spes. I was in college during Vatican II, and these words really have stayed with me through all these years. The joys and hopes, the griefs and anxieties of the peoples of this age, especially those who are poor or in any way afflicted, these are the joys and hopes, the griefs and anxieties of the followers of Christ. Some thing that perhaps some of you haven't heard about, we were fortunate that during the Synod of Bishops on the Amazon last year, some of the Brazilian bishops and others orchestrated a reenacting of the Pact of the Catacombs that was signed at the end of the last section of Vatican II. And I just took out a few of the paragraphs which reflect the spirit that has permeated the local churches, the different dioceses and prelatures in Brazil, based on this very spirit which some of the bishops in Vatican II wrote down and sealed an agreement among themselves. Aware of the deficiencies of our lives of poverty according to the gospel, we will seek to live according to the ordinary manner of our people regarding habitation, food, means of transport, and all which springs from this. For example, all the special protocols, special titles, episcopal residents that look very different from the others, et cetera, even for parish residences and so forth. An attempt to really reduce at least as much as possible the external differences between church workers, mass servers, and the people with whom they serve. That was very evident here in Brazil. I had experience to be with Dom Pedro Casaldáliga, Catalan a bishop from Catalonia, who really took this very seriously and today lives in a very, very simple house. Today, it's actually simpler than the people around him, but when it was built, it was very similar to those around. Conscious of the demands of justice and charity and their mutual relationship, we will seek to transform assistance activities into social works based on justice and charity. I think this has been a long struggle for our church. Many people are generous in offering charity, sharing what they have, but it really was Vatican II that woke us up to the question of it's not enough to give to those who are needy, but to try to understand what are the social structures that keep them needy. And thirdly, we will do our utmost so that those responsible for government put into practice structures required by justice and charity, equality, and the harmonic and holistic development of all. In other words, we can't just be there for the poor, for the unfortunate, but also to try to change the social structures or create new ones that will provide more equitable service and conditions, living conditions for all. DAP was founded before the CPT. Soon after Vatican II, Pope Paul VI wrote the encyclical Populorum Progressio. And I chose a few of the phrases from that. To awaken in the people of God full awareness of their mission today to further the progress of poorer nations and international social justice, as well as to help less developed nations to contribute to their own development. Two interrelated aspects of service that the church is called to provide for those less fortunate, and to understand that they are an integral part of our mission. And based on this, and much to our appreciation here in Brazil, rather than establishing teams in other countries, DAP has identified organizations in developing countries with whom to partner in this mission. And DAP has supported the work of CPT since the late 70s. In 1998, the national executive of the CPT convoked a program of renewal for the pastoral agents around the country. And those of us who had at least 10 years as member, active member of the CPT participated in this seminar about 4 days long, at the end of which we elaborated this mission statement, which rings very true till today. And each word was really kind of hammered out together by the group who was present. Convoked by the subversive memory of the gospel of life and hope, faithful to the God of the poor, and to the poor of the land, listening to the cry that comes from the fields and forests, following the practice of Jesus, CPT aims to be a supportive, prophetic, ecumenical, fraternal, and affective presence, which provides an educational and transformative service among the peoples of the land and the waters, in order to stimulate and reinforce their protagonism. I want to go back to parts of this, if you allow me to do. First is the first line. Thank you. That for us, we understand that the memory of the gospel, if understood, how Jesus of Nazareth tried to live his life, really was subversive, and its memory should keep us subversive. Subversive is in the sense of not becoming accommodated to unjust structures, but trying to strive for justice for all. And the other aspect at the CPT, in first and foremost, tries to be a presence, a supportive presence. In other words, we do certain activities, but it's the quality of presence which is even more important than the activities that we carry out. Okay. Armelia said that you would be interested in understanding more what does it mean to say that the CPT accompanies rural communities in conflicts. There are different kinds of conflicts that rural communities face. We could roughly put people into three categories. They either are landowners, or they are squatters who have legal possession to the land because they've been on it for years and there's been no contestation of by an owner, and others who are landless. So we work with the three groups. Most of our attention would be on these that are mentioned here in this slide. In the case of the landless families who occupy public lands, they're struggling to have a piece of land to cultivate and support their families. Some of them do that by occupying public land. They put up a makeshift house and they start cultivating. Others, because of restrictions placed on occupation of land, formed encampments outside of the boundary of huge tracts of idle land purported to belong to a landowner, but that person is not investing in anything to develop the land, to provide food, or to provide employment. And in the third case, in different places, the landless families organize demonstrations to raise public awareness about this, that there are some people with lots and lots of land and others not with even a little bit to cultivate for their families. In the case of the squatters, they're in areas where the land was not subdivided yet into tracts of land with titles. But if they've been there peacefully without any questioning from a landowner for a few years, they have a legal right to remain on the land. But recently, as the political situation has changed in the country the last few years, the big landowners and their representatives in Congress have changed many of the laws, and a good number of judges around the country are either landowners themselves or very much in harmony with landowners. So they end up accepting a landowner's request for eviction of squatters, even though they were not using the land for like 10 or 15 years. So the CPT tries to support those families through the legal processes and also to try to negotiate with the federal land aid to see the possibility of disappropriation. More recently, there have been more cases of land grabbers of public land than that where it was idle private land, private property. So in the past 5 to 10 years, most of the conflicts involve land grabbers. And in addition to those squatters, each of them have their own individual lots. There are traditional communities who sustain themselves as a community in a given forested area, for example, by collecting nuts, rubber tapping, or if they're by a waterway, small scale fishing and agriculture, but they do it collectively. They don't subdivide the land into lots. And they're struggling to have their collective right to land recognized by the federal government. And the third group with those along the waterways, or those who are on the land trying to cultivate and are suffering the effects of all the chemicals that the agribusiness sprays over the land, and it goes not only from the soy plantation, but also into their own crops and affects their health as well. And in addition, past governments and present invest a great deal of money in huge government infrastructures of hydroelectric plants, transposition of a huge river in the Northeast, and that impacts the people who have lived in those places over the years. Since its beginning, the CPT has tried to accompany, publicize, and pressure the state to penalize those who create conditions, labor conditions, which are analogous to slave labor. This happened frequently in the 70s and 80s in the Amazon region as ranches were being opened. Rural workers would come in trucks from the Northeast. They would go to very isolated places, and then they would be treated with water that was unsuitable to drink, very poor conditions, housing conditions, and then also had to buy all their goods in the company store. So they would end up being indebted, even though they were working many long hours. So the CPT from the 70s on has really been trying to find out those cases, publicize it through whatever means at our disposal, and then work very closely with public ministry and the Ministry of Labor to try to detect and I can't remember the words in English, to have oversight as to see if they could be held responsible for the crime of slave labor. And it has also, in the past few years, tried to, in addition to doing that, which would be after the fact, trying to solve, or at least free the enslaved workers. In the past few years, it has tried to work increasingly in the towns and states where most of those workers are called and invited to come and work in these ranches, and to explain to them the dangers of the conditions there. And that has made a difference. This symbol of this farm worker here with the hoe on his shoulder is from a little pamphlet that they distribute to the workers. The CPT encourages sustainable production on family farms. This would be more with both with the squatters, with all of the farmers who are cultivating, even those who don't have title to the land as of yet. And it varies from one part of the country to the other, depending on the particular environmental setting, the kind of land, and also the practices that people already are accustomed to doing, how they usually farm the land. Can't come in and give them a recipe, now follow these steps. It doesn't work. It has to be from, as Genevieve was saying, basic to our work is accompaniment. So part of it's very important for us to understand and respect where they're at, and then try to build from that. So it will vary from one part of the country, and more in the Amazon region, encouraging agroforest system, which is a combination of yearly crops planted among the trees. And the trees could be for lumber, the trees could be for nuts, for fruits. If it's a family, small families, they're going to look for crops. So there wouldn't be the lumber, because that destroys, it kills the trees. It would be more fruits and nuts and the annual crops. In the South, and more from the Midwest to the South, they've worked quite a bit with trying to get the farmers to collect and distribute among themselves different kinds of native seeds, because big multinationals have come in and put patents on most of the rice and beans and corn that is planted in Brazil, in addition to soy. So they're trying to collect, distribute, keep alive this practice and also this bank. So they've created native seed banks also. On a smaller scale, closer to bigger cities, there are some CPT teams that support farmers who work with organic agriculture, or at least produce fruits and vegetables without the use of chemical sprays. Some try free-range chickens, whatever they can sell in the public markets. direct from producers to consumers. Another aspect which has been active since the beginning of the CPT, when I mentioned since the 70s, denouncing slave labor conditions, also since the 70s, the CPT, actually in the first year that it was created in 1975, in December, they put out their first mimeographed newsletter that had articles about land conflict and about slave labor. And that has evolved over the years. So today we have a printed newspaper that is distributed 6 times a year, and then online site where people could get information as well. And since 1985, just explaining, this publicizing conflicts made those responsible for the conflict, the big landowners, very uncomfortable. And they began to contest that what the CPT was saying was not true. So by 1985, 10 years after the CPT was created, we started to have a data bank, which in the beginning was quite basic, using database. And then when I was in the prelature of St. Felix, for example, we would have a mimeograph sheet that we would fill out with the name of the fazenda and the number of families who were poseidus, who were being threatened to be put off the land, and other details that we could give, and we would send it by mail to Goiânia. Now we can do everything via internet, WhatsApp, etc. And since 1985, the National Secretariat has a team, documentation team, that analyzes the information that it receives from the base teams in the different regions of Brazil. And so they process the information, put it into the data bank, and then by the end of the year, they are able to kind of at least identify certain trends in the kinds of struggles that had been more predominant in that particular year, or perhaps the new modes of violence or the new modes of resistance, new modes of violence of those who are trying to get people off the land, and the new forms of resistance of those who are trying to stay on the land. And this document, which began to be published, the yearly report in 1985, called Conflicts in Rural Brazil, serves both the popular movements in the field and also kind of pressures the state to do something about conditions, because what we have found is that the CPT is the only organization in Brazil and perhaps in the world that actually does this kind of service. So it puts in a clear, understandable manner the data in spreadsheets and analyses to help the readers understand the dynamics of land conflicts, conflicts over water, conflicts over the use of chemical defensives on the land and its impact on rural populations, the effects of mining, etc. And based on this information, including the question of the number of murders each year connected with rural conflicts, the number of people who are threatened of murder, those who suffered attempts at murder, in addition to threats to be expelled from the land by gunmen. So that kind of information is published yearly. And periodically, the CPT has shared that, even when they've had parliamentary sessions on land, rural violence and so forth, they call on the CPT to provide the information. So it ends up being a very useful instrument to kind of expose the state as for its inaction over the years. And it is very reliable information. We only include information when we can, following the methodology of the documentation team, we can give a reasonable confirmation that victim of some form of aggression was associated with the rural conflict. On the left of your screen is a small picture of the covers of the yearly reports. And then on the right, a composite. If you look in the middle of the picture, kind of faded, that's groups of documents with paper clips identifying the case. And then the folders, the red folders underneath would be the way they are registered in the data bank. And we now call the documentation team the Center of Documentation Don Tomás Balduino, who was one of the founders of the CPT and president during some time. This is a more recent example of how the documentation team has influenced, well, pressured actually the public agencies to act. We've been able since the 70s, late 70s, early 80s, to work in close partnership with the public ministry. And in 2017, there were several cases of attacks, massacres, and attacks on rural communities. The first one was on April 19th in the northernmost border of the state of Mato Grosso. The border is shared with the area where the community Machadinha do Oeste that you folks are supporting during your Lenten campaign. What I heard from Zezinho, who was the pastoral agent who helped coordinate this with Anne Catherine to send the information to you to use in your Lenten campaign. Zezinho said that some of the gunmen responsible for this massacre, which left 10 dead in Colniza, Mato Grosso, they would transit through Machadinha do Oeste, community of rubber tappers. So it's a very, in addition to the massacre itself, those all around are obviously very, very shaken and affected by it. The same year, 11 days later, there was an attempt at a massacre of a group of indigenous people in the state of Maranhão, in which 22 people were seriously wounded and a couple suffered attempts at murder but were survived. So after those two, and then the third event was on the 11th of May in Rondônia, again, the state where Machadinho do Oeste is. 3 workers were killed in the town of Vilhena for they were associated with, there was an occupation of landless workers, and they were seen as being very friendly but supporting of them. They were killed and their bodies were found burnt in a pickup truck. So after these 3 events, we from the CPT, the national executive, we contacted the National Council of Human Rights and the public ministry and the main ministry, federal ministry in Brazil, and we requested to have a special event. Some of the pictures on the left are from that event. in which we gathered people from indigenous communities, communities of poseidons, communities of the landless, who came to tell their stories of the threats that they had suffered and the dangers that they were facing daily in those areas, mostly again in the Amazon region. And later on, a month later, thanks to this event, and CPT participated very integrally with it, the National Council of Human Rights carried out a mission in Hondonia, and they went to several places to verify the reports that had been given about the conflicts, rural conflicts in that state. I'm winding down now. I hope you're not too tired. One other thing that I thought really important to share with you is that much like DAP, the CPT counts on the generous work of hundreds of volunteers throughout the country. Very different from many NGOs. The CPT is composed of almost 700 people, and about 500 of them are volunteers, and fewer than 190, 185 are paid staff. And we're organized in 91 local teams, and these in 21 regions across the country, in addition to the National Secretariat, where the documentation, communication, and coordination teams are located. Representatives of all these regions meet twice a year to discuss common concerns and strategies by a system of representation, because we're too many we can't afford to bring everybody together. So what we've worked to try to not lose touch with the broader population of CPT pastoral agents and the communities that we work with. Every 5 years, the CPT holds a national congress with about 700 participants. And in this case, only about 1/4 are pastoral agents and 3/4 are people from these rural communities, whether they're peasant leaders or members of peasant communities and other kinds of organizations, the traditional communities, etc. And during this time, we discuss their struggles and challenges, and then we ask for them to help set directions for the CPT in the years to come till the next Congress. We were scheduled to have Congress in July, but now with COVID-19, we have to reschedule. We're not sure if it'll be the end of the second semester or next year. And to end, I remember this quote. It has stayed with me. You have to remember, I told you in the beginning that I was in college during Vatican II, and soon after, I learned about this Synod on Justice in the World, which was carried out in 1971. And this phrase has stayed with me all the years, and to me very much reflects the partnership between DAP and CPT and the spirit that animates both of our organizations. Action on behalf of justice and participation in the transformation of the world fully appear to us as constitutive dimensions of the preaching of the gospel. Or in other words, of the church's mission for the redemption of the human race and its liberation from every oppressive situation. And getting back to what Genevieve said at the beginning, that's why the effort at solidarity and donations is very much connected with the educational efforts that you do, like through this Lenten campaign you're sharing with us and other initiatives I've seen in pamphlets that you've sent out and so forth. Not just ask for a donation, but try to motivate people to really experience a sense of solidarity and partnership with these people around the world, mostly in the developing South. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Jean, for this excellent presentation. The questions have been starting to arrive already, so that's a good indication of how engaging your presentation has been. So just to all of the listeners, thank you very much for your attentiveness. And just remember, if you would like to ask Sister Jean a question, please type it into the chat box. Some of you who are familiar with Zoom, you might know that there's a raise hands option, but we're not doing that. We're just focusing on the chat box. So please kindly put that your questions into the chat box. So we're going to start right away from a question from Natalie. Sister Jean, how do you publicize the slave labor conditions while not putting the laborers in danger from their bosses for letting out the secrets?
We have a whole system that we've developed over the years. Obviously, you can imagine before we had a national campaign, the national campaign of the CPT began officially, in a more organized way, in 2005. In 1995. But much earlier than that, in the late 70s and into the 80s, we already developed a system to secure those. First of all, we find out about the problems by someone who has fled the place where they were held in bondage. They don't have chains on them. They're held because they have a debt. They're held because there might be someone there holding a firearm. And then in the beginning, we found mostly through people that one or another would eventually flee and get to a place where they communicated with somebody in the church or in the farm workers union or directly with the CPT, and eventually we would get involved and try to help organize the Ministry of Labor to go and to send a team in together with the public ministry, so that because the labor ministry can't accuse them of a crime, they can only see how many people were affected, the conditions there, and then oblige the ranchers to pay all the labor rights that those people that were involved. So we do it mostly with people who've already fled, so we're not putting in danger. Also, there is a system where the team of professionals that go in there, officials that go in there to check out the situation, they go accompanied by federal police, and they try to do it on the basis of surprise, so that by the time they get there, it's too late for any hired gunman to do any reaction.
Okay, thank you, Natalie, for that question. The next question, I hope I'm going to pronounce your name correctly, Ray Weniger. And the question is about your yearly report, Sister Jean. How useful really is a CPT's yearly report, Conflicts in Rural Brazil, against the landowners and legal and financial power brokers? Are you seeing positive change supporting and protecting the poor? Your reports of murder and threats are so distressing. The CPT is an admirable organization for which Development and Peace, your sister organization in Canada, also established by the bishops of the church, could take inspiration and example in the future. So the question is the effectiveness of your annual reports.
We hold them to be effective in raising public awareness, number one. Number two, exposing the public agencies who are not doing what is necessary to prevent and to hold accountable those who violate labor laws, for example, or other kinds if those are responsible for physical violence in the land conflicts. In third, the third area of those, the perpetrators, I would say perhaps we have had less it's not a clear cause and effect relationship. We can't say that because we put out this report that the number of crimes has been reduced. But we get through the report and how carefully it is produced, we can call the state to task. When I say state, I'm talking about public agencies in all levels. Each House of Congress has human rights commissions. The public ministry itself, different public agencies do take seriously, and they do count on us for reliable information. But unfortunately, Brazil is a capitalistic country like most in the world. And those who have seem to want to have more, unfortunately. So that there still seems to be a growing number of cases of violence. It kind of fluctuates. There are times in which we can see clearly that when the state takes more initiative to inhibit violence, there's a reduction. And then when the state, like for example, those who defend minimum government, well then those public agencies are kind of shrink, and there are more cases of violence. So it's really public awareness, effect of public agencies, collaborating with the public ministry and with the special commissions in Congress to bring about change.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question is from Gil or Jill. Does CPT have a voice at the United Nations?
No. The CPT participates in the platform. I don't remember the official name. It's connected. There's a platform which has the initials of the different kinds of human rights. Human rights started out with, would be HR in English, and Portuguese would be DH, Direitos Humanos. But over the years, they've added the other human rights, which would be social, environmental, economic. I think there's one more. So there's a platform that we participate in with other organizations, both popular movements and agencies like the CPT that offer support for both rural and urban communities. So that's our link. And directly too, we have provided information directly to the High Commissioner of the UN of Human Rights as well.
Okay, that's great to hear. Our following question is from Marcella. I assume you work with Via Campesina, but are the leaders of Via Campesina the same as the CPT? And does the lead, is there an overlap in leadership?
No, very distinct. The Via Campesina, we do participate as members in the Via Campesina at their invitation. But the CPT doesn't hold any elected seats or in their general coordination. It's more of a collaboration so that the CPT can really keep on track. In other words, when I mentioned in the beginning in our mission statement, our purpose is to try to be a support to those who should assume the frontline protagonism themselves, the campesinos, the peasants themselves. So we do participate in their events, collaborate when they're trying to produce a public statement. We did just past week. So we do it in that way, but our role is a little bit different than the peasant organizations in Via Campesina.
Okay, thank you, Marcella, for that question. Now here is an intervention from Nancy, and I'm not sure, I think that it's a question maybe to all of us here in Canada. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. We can learn a lot from you, our partner. The way the landless lives near empty land, the way the landless live near empty land and want to grow food, I see a similarity of our housing situation in Canada. We see empty apartments and people who need a place to live, wanting to live in those empty apartments. Can we extrapolate a strategy to solve both these problems and situations? It's a great question to pose to us. I don't know, Sister Jean, would you like to make some comment on that?
Well, I think I can comment that because of the experience of the CPT over the years, actually we have been at the regional level, have been invited to collaborate with popular movements in the cities that want to begin to address the question of housing. And the parallel that was made by Nancy, I think, was very accurate. But we tried to do it on a very provisional basis, and then to say that our main mission is to the rural communities and to try to help identify other organizations that can support people in the cities. But it is a very real question, and it is a very good parallel between the landless and the homeless. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And we have a question from Rebecca. Which accomplishment of the CPT are you most proud of?
Gee, that's kind of hard. One that comes to me that is out of date. When I moved from the Prelature of São Félix in the state of Mato Grosso, which is neighboring state to the state of Goiás, just for curiosity's sake, I, together with a colleague in the CPT, we looked up the information on the number of agrarian reform settlements in the area of the Prelature of São Félix, which prelature is another word for diocese. It's a less structured diocese. I don't know if you're familiar with it. And at that time, more than 50% of the population in the Prelature of São Félix, the total number of people in the 14 townships in that diocese, Prelature, more than 50% of them were related, living on or cultivating land in agrarian reform projects, most of which were won by the struggle of the people who occupied the land first and faced hired gunmen, faced threats, and many kind evictions and other hardships, and stayed on until they finally got their squatters' rights recognized and their agrarian reform projects were formed. That's one concrete example that I found out in 2006. But there have been the fact that the Brazilian government now has a national council to monitor and investigate cases of slave labor. The CPT was instrumental in creating that organization called CONATRAI. Also contributed quite significantly to ongoing formation, both for the pastoral agents in the CPT themselves, as well as the people in the rural communities, because we feel that in order for them to eventually get on their own, be able to manage without our presence, they need to understand the reality that they're facing. So we really do emphasize ongoing formation as well. So many of those people end up becoming leaders in their communities and in their popular movements.
Okay, thank you, Sister Jean. A great question, Rebecca. This next question, we don't know the source who has provided, but thank you for the question. Can you talk about the environmental damage that is happening in the region?
And that most of you in August saw scenes of the fires through the Amazon region. Did that reach you folks? Oh, your
Yes, it certainly did. Yeah.
Okay. That was just one of the most recent signs. As I said earlier, when the public agencies are active, the violent members of society kind of take a step back. When the public agencies are either limited by reduced budget, or somebody comes into power as governor or as president who doesn't believe in that particular service, public service, they just, they'll nominate people to be superintendent or overseer or whatever, who just won't do all that is possible with the personnel and the budget that he or she has. And also, Congress has a very significant majority of deputy Congress people who are landowners themselves. And unfortunately, the majority of those are interested in always accumulating more land. And over the past few years, they've weakened the laws that we had concerning the use of land. For example, the land in the Amazon, only 20% is allowed to be cultivated, and 80% should stay standing forest. But it's very, very common that land grabbers and illegal lumberers come in and just destroy all the area that they've taken possession of. So the environmental question in the past 2 or 3 years has become increasingly more accentuated as the majority of people in Congress and in the presidency have just kind of handed over, left it open actually to those to do what they want. Our present president says, that a landowner ought to be able to defend his land with firearms. Well, he's also published a decree saying that you can have one permit for a firearm and use it for as many weapons as you want. So those who have the desire to accumulate more land, to make money on felling the trees and selling the lumber, they're just going full force ahead. And Bolsonaro, unfortunately, seems to think that's a good idea.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to combine the next 2 questions. They're very similar. They build on one another. The first question is from Gilles, and the second from Ada. Has the government ever prosecuted those that have committed these crimes or killings or massacres that you've mentioned? And just to add on to that, what rate of assassinations and with the rate of assassinations and killings, are you not putting your life yourself at risk? Have there been any threats to your life as a person? So the first question again, has the government ever prosecuted those that have committed massacres? And with this rate of assassinations and killings, are you not putting your life at risk? And have you received threats?
For the first part, happens, I'll just say something general about murders. Frequently, murders involving the rural poor, peasants, the small farmers, the squatters, the landless who are occupying land. Frequently, when the police arrives at the scene of the crime, they remove the body or they alter the crime scene before the official forensic study is done. In those cases, when the case the investigation, police investigation is handed over to the public ministry, frequently the promoter will say, we don't have enough clear evidence to be able to accuse someone. I was very closely related to a young pastoral agent in the south of Goiás, where I began my mission, who after I moved to the prelature of São Felix, he was murdered by the big fazendeiros there. And the scene of the crime, they removed the body, they didn't do anything properly. So that process was never, it didn't go anywhere because the public ministry said they didn't have the necessary material proof to be able to accuse anyone. And that happens frequently. In other cases, the investigation, the police investigation is concluded, it is passed to the public ministry who makes the accusation, the formal accusation, and then it gets stuck in the courts. And if there isn't some lawyer checking and making sure that things are moving, and even sometimes when they do, the cases just don't move along. They just stop along the way. So we have, the number that we have, I can't tell you exactly, it's over 1,800 murders of connected with rural land, conflicts over mostly land, but also water and the environment in general. Just a little over 200 ever reached a court case. And just a few over 100 people have been condemned, have been convicted of crimes. So it's a very, very, it's less than 10% of the number of victims. So it's a very, very sad situation. As far as my own well-being, I've actually never had any kind of a clear threat. Once when I was living in the prelature of São Felix, there was a land conflict along about 100 kilometers from where we were. And a squatter was wounded, shot. So at that time, we didn't have phones in our houses, so we had to go to a public phone station. And I went to the phone station and used the phone booth, and you have to shout because it was a bad connection. So I'm reporting to the regional office of the CPT that somebody had been shot, and I gave the name of the fazenda and told how many families or whatever. And then as I'm leaving the phone booth, come out of the phone booth, I see the gunman coming out of another phone booth. He had just finished telling whoever was paying him that he had finished the job. So that's as close as I got.
Well, we wish you good protection, Sister Jean. I think we're going to close with this last question now because we're getting close to the time, and you've been doing a lot of energetic presenting to us. So this question comes from Sandra. Sister Jean, your accomplishments are inspiring. Your tenacity with your work is very moving. Is there something you have not done with CPT and your vocation that you still seek to do? A great question for ending this conversation.
I would say that what is most important and what actually I think has motivated me to continue in the CPT for almost 40 years is the emphasis of most of the pastoral agents in the CPT around the country in the notion of accompaniment, and it's mutual. It's the pastoral agents try to accompany the rural communities, both those who are struggling to cultivate the land, sustain their families, improve their income and so forth, and then also to support those who are facing different conflict situations. And then we also try to offer that accompaniment between the regional offices try to offer support and accompaniment to their members in the local teams, and the national coordination tries to offer accompaniment and support to the regional teams. And that to me has been the essence of our work, and that whether it's an isolated rural community or a local team of 3 or 4 members of the CPT, they know that we'll be there with them through it all. And I feel that's very similar to what we share with you at the CPT, that it's not a question of, well, when this grant is over, we don't know what the future will hold. We really can feel that the DAP believes in the work that we do and will do all in its power to be able to continue that support. And we're very grateful.
Forgive me, but there was a lovely one more question that came in just as I was saying this is the last one. So we'll go with it if you don't mind. Are any efforts directed towards an ecumenical approach in support of justice and peace?
Yes. The CPT participates in the Catholic group of pastoral ministries, all of the social ministries, and then has a smaller group with those connected mostly with rural communities. And in both of those spheres, there's constant interaction with members of different churches. The CPT itself makes efforts to be ecumenical. It was very interesting that even though in the beginning it was created as mostly Catholics, and still today most members are Catholics, but gradually we've welcomed more Protestants of the mainline churches and evangelicals into our local teams. And obviously there are many, many in the communities that we serve. So we don't just serve those who are Catholics. It's very mixed. As far as collaboration with other organizations, through the CNBB, the Conference of Bishops, the CPT collaborates with CONICI, which is the Council of Other Christian Churches in Brazil. And frequently when we have ongoing formation encounters, seminars, we invite Protestant leaders, pastors. Last year, Homie, I can't remember her last name, she's the president of CONICI, spoke for our national formation encounter as an opening, on the opening day, the whole day. So very, very closely connected, yes.
Oh, that's great to know. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you everyone for your great questions. They're just very, obviously demonstrates your engagement in these global issues and your understanding of Brazil in particular. At this time, again, Sister Jean, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation, very inspiring, motivating, informative, educating us. And I would like to call on Genevieve now to give us some closing remarks.
Thanks, Armella. And thank you, Sister Jean. Your presentation was really interesting. I particularly found it interesting you talking about the importance of making sure that various levels of government are fulfilling their roles. The use of public funds should be in support of vulnerable people. That really spoke to me today. It's something that is really, we've got a program in the Philippines, similarly working on housing and land, and they were able to take the small support of development and peace, which in a 5 or 6 year project was about $65,000, and able to leverage that into the Philippines Housing Authority to contribute $9.2 million to a housing project. So that importance of leveraging, and again, development and peace can't, contribute without the support of our donors. So it's a real, it really is partnership, that kind of experience of mutual support and mobilization. Mm-hmm. And thank you also, you spoke a bit about how the long-term support of development and peace improves the effectiveness of your work. So the work doesn't have to be piecemeal or irregular, which often happens with an uncertainty in funding. Instead, the work can go forward with proper programming and delivery, and then has the ability to do to act as a multiplier. We know that long-term campaigns require years and can have profound results. I'm thinking about when we did our campaign on mining with development and peace. That was a multi-year project. The importance of accountability in the extractive sector, which came together because of all the work of our volunteers and because of all the information and requests we received from our partners in the Global South. So I'm giving you my last pitch. Our monthly giving program is really a way to engage in partnership, to enter into partnership. It will offer groups like Sister Jean's and the CPT the chance to have longer term support. I know it's a little bit of a tricky time, not a little bit, it's a massively tricky time to be reaching out to people and asking for donations. But I would recommend you ask your friends and family, or even consider yourself even just $5 a month. That can help sustain us. And with hope in better times, maybe you could do a little bit more. For us, we know the Global South is going to be doubly hit going forward, potential funding cuts from the North, in addition to dealing with COVID-19, is going to be quite difficult. You see on the screen, there's a couple ways that we're receiving donations. One is on our website. The second is by calling us, and I'm one of the volunteers on our phone lines this weekend. So please feel free to call in. I'd love to chat with you, especially since I know most of the people on the call. And then the last is sending a check by mail. That's also an option. And I want to say once again, Development of Peace is an organization blessed by the widow's mite. We receive a lot of small donations, and that is what we want. There's actually more stability when you have everyone giving a small amount, because it means then in tough times, people still have reasonable budgets and stable fundraising. So it's a positive thing to us, lots of small donations. So once again, thank you very much for being with us. I'm thrilled you got to meet Sister Jean. I'm thrilled. I'm really motivated. It was really, really helpful, especially we've been working on the Amazon all year and really working on that mobilization and public engagement. So to have you teach us a little bit more about your reality, it's very motivational. And I really pray for the health and safety of everyone, those close to us and our families and communities, and everybody who's grappling with these unprecedented times with COVID-19. So thank you very much, everybody. Marie-Hélène Bachand, who's our behind-the-scenes person, has shared with you the fact that we're recording this, so we'll be able to share it afterwards. So we can share that. And I know my mom is looking forward to being able to watch me on screen a few more times. So hi, Mom. And that number, it's 188 number, and I'd be happy to take your call. I've got my little headset. It would be thrilling for me to chat with people from across Canada this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you. Thank you, Sister Jean. Thank you, Jen. Thank you to each and every one of you who have stayed with us for this whole hour and a half. I've been very inspired by everyone here in this call. And Sister Jean, again, I would like to add my prayers of blessing and good health to you, and protection to you and all of the CPT people that are working, volunteers and staff. God bless you, and have a good weekend, everyone.